Run up to a 32-inch tire while leveling the front of your vehicle with the rear, using Rough Country's 2-inch leveling kit for GM 1500 pickups and SUVs. To begin installation, jack up the front of the vehicle until the wheels are off the ground. Support the vehicle with jack stands. Remove the front wheels and tires using a 21mm deep well socket. On models with electric power steering, remove the 6 bolts holding the factory skid plate using a 15mm socket and unplug the 3 connectors going to the electric power steering. Using an 18mm wrench, loosen the upper strut bolts. It is not necessary to remove these nuts. And remove the upper ball joint nut using an 18mm wrench. Using a hammer, hit the knuckle to allow the ball joint to separate from the knuckle. Using a 21mm wrench, remove the nut from the steering linkage. Remove the linkage from the knuckle. Remove the sway bar nut and bushings using a 15mm wrench and socket, and again retain the factory hardware. Using a 15mm wrench, remove the bolts from the bottom strut mount. Remove the bolt clips from the bottom of the strut using a flathead screwdriver. Place the strut spacer on the lower strut mount and align the holes. Install the new 10mm bolts, washers, and nuts provided in the kit. Tighten using a 17mm wrench for the bolt and a 16mm wrench for the nut. Using an 18mm wrench, tighten the upper strut nuts, torquing to factory specs. Raise the lower control arm and connect the upper ball joint on the upper control arm to the spindle. Using an 18mm wrench, torque to factory specs. If the ball joint turns while tightening, use a 7/32 Allen wrench to prevent the ball joint from spinning. Reinstall the steering linkage nut using a 21mm wrench. If the ball joint turns while tightening, use a 10mm wrench to hold the bottom of the tie rod. Repeat all the steps on the other side before using a 15mm wrench to reinstall the sway bar bushings and nut using factory hardware, then torquing to factory specs. Plug the 3 connectors back into the electric power steering and reinstall the factory skid plate. Reinstall the vehicle's wheels and tires and jack up the vehicle to remove the jack stands. Lower the vehicle to the ground and torque all bolts to factory specifications.